Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Exodus chapter 34 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're picking up right after one of the absolute most catastrophic failures in the entire source material, the incident of the golden calf. The relationship between God and Israel is, well, it's completely shattered at this point. The original covenant, broken. And we're left wondering, is there any way this bond can actually be fixed? Today, we're going to look closely at the actual text, going verse by verse to understand exactly what is happening in this absolutely crucial moment of renewal, boundary setting, and profound encounter with the divine.
To understand how this broken bond is repaired, we'll walk sequentially through the chapter. We'll start with Moses returning to the mountain, explore the famous revelation of God's mercy, examine the strict new rules of their renewed covenant, and finally, look at the physical transformation Moses undergoes before drawing out the practical lessons we can apply today.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, context and the mountain, where Moses is commanded to return. We're looking at verses 1 through 4 here.
In verses 1 and 2, God is initiating a renewal of the covenant, but there's a really important change from the first time around. See, in the first instance, God provided the stone himself, but this time, God commands Moses to physically carve the 2 stone tablets. The Hebrew phrase used here is pasolacha, which literally translates to carve for yourself. Moses has to put in the physical labor, the sweat, and the sheer effort to literally rebuild the foundation of what was broken in anger. He's told to make them exactly like the first ones, and God promises to graciously write on them the very same words that were on the shattered tablets. Moses is instructed to be ready in the morning and to ascend Mount Sinai to present himself.
Then, verse 3 drops a really specific condition. God says, "No one is to come with you." This establishes the profound holiness and exclusivity of the space where Moses is going to meet with the divine. The plain text is incredibly strict about this. No person is to be seen anywhere on the entire mountain. And it goes even further. Even the flocks and herds are forbidden from grazing in front of it. It has to be an absolute, completely isolated encounter to ensure total focus. And in verse 4, Moses does exactly as he's commanded. He chisels the stones, wakes up early, and ascends Mount Sinai with those blank tablets in his hands.
So, that brings us to section 2, the attributes of mercy, focusing on God's revelation in the cloud in verses 5 through 9.
In verses 5 and 6, we get this truly breathtaking moment. The Lord descends in a cloud, stands right there with Moses, and explicitly proclaims his own name and character. As God passes in front of him, he calls out these exact words. Now, this isn't just a title, it's a profound declaration of how God actually interacts with humanity. In Jewish tradition, these verses contain what are known as the 13 attributes of mercy, and they establish a foundational understanding of divine compassion.
Now, look at how verse 7 perfectly balances overwhelming mercy with the absolute necessity of justice. It's fascinating. God describes himself as compassionate, gracious, and slow to anger, meaning he is incredibly patient with human flaws. He abounds in love and faithfulness, maintaining that love to thousands of generations, and actively forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. But then the text makes a sharp pivot right at the end of the verse. It says he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He holds people accountable, tracking the consequences of deeply ingrained sin down to the 3rd and 4th generations. So what we're looking at is a complete picture of a God who is vastly forgiving, yet fundamentally just.
Immediately upon hearing this, in verse 8, Moses literally bows down to the ground and worships. Then, in verse 9, he makes a pretty bold request. He asks God, "If I have found favor in your eyes, let the Lord go with us." And he uses a very specific, kind of surprising term to describe the Israelites. He calls them stiff-neck. The Hebrew word here is kashay oref, which is actually a plain text agricultural term. It refers to a beast of burden that refuses to turn its head when guided by a yoke. It simply means deeply, deeply stubborn. But rather than denying this, Moses uses the plain reality of the people's flaws to ask for God's direct guidance. He essentially says, yes, they are stubborn, which is exactly why we desperately need you to forgive our sin and take us as your inheritance.
God accepts Moses' plea, but a renewed relationship obviously requires clear boundaries. This leads us right into section 3, the renewed covenant laws. These are the conditions for the promised land, covering verses 10 through 26.
In verses 10 through 12, God says, "I am making a covenant with you." He promises unprecedented miracles, literally stating he will do wonders never before done in any nation. He promises to drive out the current inhabitants of the promised land, but he immediately follows this incredible promise with strict boundaries regarding those local inhabitants. He warns the Israelites not to make any treaties with them, because those treaties will become a snare. They'll be a dangerous trap living right in their midst.
To understand why God is so incredibly strict about this, we just have to look at verse 14. God explicitly commands them not to worship any other god, stating that his name is jealous, or El-Kanah in Hebrew. Now, in this context, this does not mean petty human envy, not at all. It means the relationship must remain entirely undivided. It's exactly like a marriage, right? He demands absolute and exclusive loyalty and will tolerate absolutely no rival worship whatsoever.
Verses 13 and 15 through 17 lay out exactly how thoroughly the Israelites have to root out the idolatrous practices of the surrounding nations. I mean, they must actively break down the foreign altars, smash their sacred stones, and cut down their Asherah poles, which were wooden symbols of a Canaanite goddess. Furthermore, they're forbidden from making treaties and, crucially, from intermarrying. The plain text warns that if they intermarry, the foreign spouses will lead the Israelites to prostitute themselves to their gods, meaning they will inevitably be lured away into idol worship. And the section concludes with a very blunt command in verse 17, do not make cast idols.
Then in verses 18 and 22 through 24, God shifts from what to avoid to exactly what they should observe, establishing a calendar of worship. First up, the Feast of Unleavened Bread must be kept in the month of Abib, which just means the month of spring, to remember their exit from Egypt. Then, the Feast of Weeks, celebrating the first fruits of the wheat harvest. Finally, the Feast of Ingathering at the turn of the agricultural year. God commands that 3 times a year, all men must appear before the sovereign Lord. And to alleviate the obvious fear of being attacked by neighbors while traveling for these festivals, God promises in verse 24 that He will protect their borders, and no one will even covet their land while they're away.
Intertwined with these festivals are the rules of the firstborn in verses 19 and 20. We learn step by step that life and livelihood are gifts. Step 1. The first offspring of every womb belongs to God. Step 2. Because a donkey was considered an unclean animal for sacrifice, its firstborn had to be redeemed or bought back by trading a lamb for it. If you didn't want to trade a lamb, its neck must be broken, which honestly seems like a terrible day for the donkey. But the point was to ensure the animal wasn't used for ordinary labor if it wasn't redeemed to God. Step 3. All firstborn human sons must also be redeemed. The verse ends with a powerful summary. No one is to appear before him empty-handed.
Right smack in the middle of these agricultural laws, we find verse 21. 6 days you shall labor, but on the 7th day you shall rest. What makes this specific repetition of the Sabbath laws so unique is the added phrase, even during the plowing season and harvest you must rest. This ensures that the Sabbath rest is absolute. Think about it. When your entire livelihood depends on getting crops in the ground before it rains, or harvesting them before a massive storm hits, resting takes profound trust. It overrides even the most urgent, stressful deadlines of human survival.
Moving on, we arrive at section 4, Moses and the tablets. We're focusing on his 40 days on the mountain in verses 27 and 28.
These verses detail the physical reality of receiving the covenant. Moses is up there with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights, and the text explicitly notes that during this entire time, he ate no bread and drank no water. This strongly implies a period of total supernatural sustainment and absolute focus. He is existing entirely on the Word of God. And at the end of this period, the words of the covenant, specifically identified here as the 10 Commandments, are written out on those stone tablets Moses had carved.
As Moses finally heads down the mountain in verses 29 through 35, we enter section 5, the radiant face, looking at his physical transformation.
The plain text tells us in verse 29 that as Moses came down carrying the tablets, he was completely unaware that his face was literally radiant. The Hebrew word used here is karan, meaning to emit rays of light. Now here's a fun, surprising fact for you. This root word is closely related to the Hebrew word for horns, which is karen. This linguistic crossover is exactly why Michelangelo's famous Renaissance statue of Moses depicts him with literal horns on his head. But the plain text meaning here is a radiant, glowing face from speaking directly with the Lord. This divine encounter had a highly visible, lingering effect, and verses 30 through 32 tell us that Aaron and the Israelites were utterly terrified of him until he called them over to give them the commands.
To manage this terrifying brightness, verses 33 to 35 outline a very practical procedure Moses ended up using for the rest of his life. Step 1. Whenever he went into the tent to speak directly with the Lord, he took his veil off. Step 2. He would come out and relay God's exact commands to the Israelites, and they would see his face shining brilliantly. Step 3. Once he finished delivering the message, he would put the veil back over his face so that people wouldn't be constantly overwhelmed by the lingering divine radiance as they just went about their daily lives in the camp. Okay, so now that we've walked completely through the text of chapter 34, from the strict isolation of the mountain to the glowing face in the camp, we have to ask ourselves, how do these ancient principles apply to our modern lives? I mean, what does a story about chiseling stone tablets and a radiant face mean for us right now?
Let's break that down in Section 6, Practical Life Lessons Applying Exodus chapter 34.
These are simple, everyday takeaways that highlight the profound importance of renewal and focus. First, embrace second chances. Just as Moses had to chisel new tablets after the first ones were broken, sometimes we have to do the really hard work of rebuilding after a massive failure, but renewal is always possible. Second, balance compassion with accountability. God described himself as endlessly forgiving, yet fundamentally just. We should absolutely strive for that same healthy balance in our own relationships. Third, guard your environment. The strict warnings against local idols remind us to be highly selective about the influences, the media, and the habits we allow into our lives, so we aren't led astray. And finally, prioritize your rest. The command to observe the Sabbath, even during the busy plowing and harvest seasons, teaches us that taking time to rest and reset is non-negotiable. Even when we feel completely overwhelmed with work, we have to pause.
Exodus 34 shows us how a shattered relationship is carefully renewed through immense mercy, clear and strict boundaries, and ultimately the radiant reflection of a dedicated life spent close to the divine. So, I want you to ask yourself today, what broken tablets in your own life are waiting for you to do the hard work of chiseling them anew? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.